Right now, standing by patiently while we babble on about the red panda, is our good friend Byron York from the Washington Examiner. Byron, how are you? Good to have you.
I'm great. You know, guys, I'm traveling, and so yesterday it wasn't until the end of the day that I realized that there was red panda mania in Washington.
It was pandemonium.
Pandemonium is how we like to call it, Byron.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Did you hear what he was really up to, though? I mean, he was seeking asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy. That's the story. Anyway, I think that's the best line of the day. Listen,
you say so yourself.
Yeah, even if I did come up with it. All right, so Byron, we wanted to have you on. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but the Senate is in the middle of this immigration debate. They had a key vote yesterday, and it now appears that by the end of the week, some legislation will emerge from the Senate. Should we be worried?
Well, we pretty much know what the legislation is. I disagree with you a little bit. I think they're about at the end of their immigration debate. The big vote really was yesterday. You know, there's this big Hoeven-Corker amendment that had 1,200
pages.
Security. Yeah, it had to do with border security, but it also threw in a lot of things that people like me have been writing about. It had a provision that did a lot of favors for the seafood industry in Alaska. It had a youth jobs program that was part of President Obama's failed second stimulus proposal, just kind of tacked on the end by Senator Bernie Sanders. It had lots of other stuff in it, and the big vote yesterday was on whether they should cut off debate over this amendment, move on, and it was huge. It got 67 votes, and you know, there were a bunch of senators who didn't get to the Senate yesterday because they were trying to fly in from their home states and they had bad weather. But even if they had all been there, the best vote that the opponents could have gotten was 31 votes. So no doubt this thing is moving forward.
All right, but is it something that we should be concerned about? I mean, is it good legislation?
Well, you know, I think there's something Britt Hume said on Sunday. He said, you know, there's just no way you can consider this to be good legislation. It is throwing money at the problem of immigration reform and border security. For example, the former bill, the former Rubio Gang of Eight bill, cost $8.3 billion, and this new version cost $46.3 billion. Bang! Overnight, went from 8.3 to 46.3, and it still doesn't measure what you would call the outputs on border security. It measures how much money you put into it, but it doesn't actually require a specific result.
Byron York is our guest. He, of course, is the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. And let's talk about the politics of this. First of all, Marco Rubio has pretty much tied his political future to this bill. And many people have thought that he was a real good candidate for the Republican nomination for president in 2016. I know you spent a lot of time in Iowa and in New Hampshire to sort of put your ear to the ground and see what the grassroots are saying. What's their impression of Marco Rubio's involvement in this bill?
Well, I've spoken to a number of grassroots people in Iowa recently, and they're very unhappy with it. There's just no doubt about they are very, very opposed to comprehensive immigration reform. They believe that in 2010, when Marco Rubio ran for Senate in Florida, his first national exposure, a Tea Party favorite, he was strongly against what he called amnesty. He really opposed the kind of bill that he's actually supporting right now. So now, there are others who say, well, you know, this is not my favorite thing to do, but I still think Rubio is a very appealing, attractive candidate, so it's not as if he's blown his chance. But he does have some damage control to do in Iowa, no doubt about it.
And meanwhile, just in terms of the politics for House Republicans and specifically Speaker John Boehner, the pressure is on for them to do something, but the pressure is increasing on both sides. What do you think House leadership on the Republican side is going to do with regard to immigration here?
Well, first of all, they're going to reject the bill that the Senate is going to pass this week. Yeah, the House Republicans, even those who favor comprehensive immigration reform, have said this Gang of Eight bill is dead in the House. So they're going to come up with something on their own, and the big question is, will they come up with a, quote, comprehensive bill, or will they break it down into a number of parts, pass a border security bill, then pass a guest worker bill, and do it that way?
There was also a very interesting article in your Washington Examiner about the differences between people who are considered, provisional immigrants, people who are sort of, in the pipeline to become citizens full time, and regular American citizens in the way that they are treated under the eyes of the law. If you're a provisional immigrant and you want to become a citizen, all kinds of things you can do that violate the law are sort of ignored. Yet if you're a regular citizen in this country, you could go to prison like for 5 to 15 years for some of these offenses.
Yeah, one of the issues is, Senator Rubio has said, if you're going to come out of the shadows and become legal, you have to pass a background check, pay back taxes, that kind of thing. Well, the background check, if it finds that you have committed crimes, one, if you've committed a felony, they say you just can't move on. But if you've committed misdemeanors, and some misdemeanors are very, very serious. A lot of places, drunk driving, vehicular homicide, some types are misdemeanors. So we're not talking about, stealing a candy bar. And if you've committed 2 misdemeanors, you can still get in, and they're on separate days. And a lot of times criminals are charged with a number of different charges on a single day. Let's say you were convicted of 3 misdemeanors on day 1, and 6 months later you're committed of 2 misdemeanors. That's 5. It only counts as 2 to get you in on the immigration bill. So I think there's a lot of unease about the amount of criminality the bill would allow for immigrants who are seeking to become legal.
Well, and have you been able to delve into this idea of whether there is, in fact, perpetual amnesty moving forward? In other words, if a year from now somebody flies into this nation and they overstay their visa, are they covered on the legalization provisions that are in this bill?
That's a great question, and a lot of this stuff is not really spelled out, and we don't know the answer to that question. We also don't know. We always talk about the 11 million, the illegal immigrants who are in this country as we speak. Well, the estimate is that only 8 or maybe 8.5 million of those will come forward and become legalized. And there's an estimate, and the CBO does this, that 2 to 2.5 million of them will not come forward. So the question is, well, what happens to them?
Right.
And I don't think, just as the 11 million will not be deported, I don't think you're going to see them be deported. So there's really no provision in this bill for what happens to the people who don't come forward, and that could be over 2 million people.
Byron York, thanks so much for joining us with all the details. Always good to have you, and unfortunately, it's just even more frustrating after hearing the reality of